Hey, I'm a novice podcaster, and I just happened to have the opportunity to take a look at some equipment here, and don't know much of what I'm looking at, but based on what I've seen, I'm going to say right off the bat that the Scarlett 2i2 is probably the better machine here than the PreSonus Studio 24C. And I say that mostly because the preamp seems a little bit stronger and because it's a bit smaller. But let's take a closer look at these. I've got some waveforms. I've recorded the same sentence a couple different times with a couple different pieces of equipment. One of them is the Audio-Technica ATR 2100X, which is a microphone that has its own built-in amp, but it also has an XLR cable port, so you can plug that into another preamp, like the Scarlett here, which I've done, as well as the Studio 24C, and take a look, see how that performs. And to my ear, it actually performs a little better when you do put it through one of these preamps, as opposed to its own built-in preamp. But that said, I've used it for about 6 months now. Audio-Technica, that is. I've used that for about 6 months, just using its preamp, and it's been a good machine. And it certainly is easy to travel around with because it's only got the mic. You don't have to bring one of these other audio interfaces or a bunch of cables. So you just need a small USB-C cable or USB-A, and that's it, just the microphone. But looking into getting a little bit more complicated and being able to have multiple people talk at the same time and record it all at once, which is a lot easier to do podcasting than rather than trying to take multiple streams and put them together. This is what we're going to look at the preamp. So look at these waveforms here. You can see how they stack up. The other microphone I had for a little while was a Shure SM58, which seemed to do a really great job. It seemed like it was a little bit louder, a little bit stronger mic than the Audio-Technica, so that was nice. But the Audio-Technica held up just fine on its own, and I think that's a great, very flexible system, because if you have both the audio interface and an Audio-Technica, it allows you to record more people. The Audio-Technica has 2 ports on it, so you can record 2 people through that. And then you can plug in the Audio-Technica separately, and then you can record 3 people. Now that works on the Mac. I don't know if it works on the PC, and that's gonna get into that in a minute when I talk about a little mini setup utility that the Mac has built in, which is kind of a neat feature. And so looking at the levels, as I said, you can clearly see what's happening there with a Shure SM58 being the best performing. And again, these are with the preamps on the audio interfaces turned up to 100%. If it's any less than that, you're really not going to hear much of anything. I just want to reiterate again, this is looking at from a podcast standpoint and with a very novice perspective on audio equipment. The one real big advantage that the Studio 24 has is that it has 2 MIDI amps built in. Doesn't help me any as a podcaster, but if you're using this to record music, that could be a big plus. And these meters, both of them have meters on the devices themselves, so you can see if you're clipping. However, they're a little bit different. On the 24, you can see that it's actually really sexy. They got nice little metering there. Unfortunately, the preamp is so weak that unless you have a very powerful mic, you're not going to see the metering. You're not going to see very much from that. Whereas the Scarlett, because the preamp is a little bit stronger, you can actually see it. Now, it's much more limited on the Scarlett because it's basically just a ring light around the volume for that port. And it flashes green if you're in the green, and flashes yellow, and then flashes red if you're clipping. It's a little bit hard to keep track of that, but it seems a little bit more useful since you can actually see it, since the preamp is a little bit stronger. A friend of mine did have a chance to look at the Focusrite as well as Studio 24 with a much nicer microphone, and he was getting much better levels out of that, but that was a $600 mic, so that's not exactly the same ballpark we're looking at here. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the nice benefits of having a Mac is that they have a little MIDI utility in the utilities folder that you can use to set up a MIDI device and actually make what's called an aggregate device. So I can plug in my Audio-Technica using its own built-in preamp into one USB port, and I can plug the Scarlett into another USB port. And that way I now have 3 feeds going in. I can have 3 microphones plugged in. The Audio-Technica using its own preamp, and the Scarlett using its preamps as well. So that's a nice way to extend the usefulness. And then there's also the size difference. The Scarlett is noticeably smaller than the Studio 24, so much so that you can actually, if you're packing this stuff up, you can fit up basically a whole nother microphone in the same space as you would be able to fit just the Studio 24. Build quality on both of these units was really nice. The Scarlett's a little bit more streamlined, so if you like things that are a little bit more inline, that's a little bit better. And I think the space and the knobs, the space around the knobs and the knobs themselves on the Scarlett are a little bit nicer, but these very trivial differences. And one final random Mac tip If you're in the Finder and you have the column view on and you notice that some of your titles are being clipped on one side or the other, you can resize the columns, obviously, but if you double click on the divider itself, it'll automatically resize that, which is great and all. Nice little tip. I just wish it would remember from session to session where those should be. It doesn't. So I hope that helped. If you have any comments or questions or corrections, please let me know in the comments. Thanks.